During the company party, he appeared out of nowhere. A cynical smile on his face, his eyes filled with an insolent arrogance, as if he knew exactly what he was about to do. And then, in front of everyone, he took her from me, without hesitation, without shame. She is mine now. The phrase was said with frightening naturalness, as if it were a fait accompli, as if I, her husband, were nothing more than an insignificant obstacle in her conquest. I stood there, frozen, feeling every gaze on me, every whisper crossing the room. I could have screamed, I could have punched that bastard until he choked on his own blood, I could have grabbed my wife by the arm and dragged her away, demanding answers. But I didn't do anything. Not a word, not a gesture. I just stood there, watching the grotesque theater that was my life falling apart in front of an audience of coworkers, friends, acquaintances. I relived every detail of what led me to that moment. The marriage, the years of dedication, the plans made together. The nights I was late at work believing I was building a future for both of us, without imagining that, while I was wasting myself, she was giving herself to another man. I thought about all the times I believed the lame excuses, the cell phones turned down, the muffled laughs on the phone, the long showers when I got home. I thought about how I always trusted her, how I never imagined that the very woman I chose to share my life with would be the first to stab me in the back. And there I was, in front of everyone, helpless. Every drop of alcohol consumed at that party dissipated from my system, leaving only a sharp, cruel lucidity. My wife's lover had not only betrayed me in secret, but now made a point of publicly humiliating me. And her? She didn't say anything. He didn't back down, he didn't protest, he didn't look at me with guilt or regret. She stood there, next to him, as if I were the mistake and he was the solution. My wife, the woman I protected, who I loved, who I put above all else, now looked at me as if I were an inconvenient stranger. The voices around me seemed distant, muffled, as if my brain refused to process reality. But then, something inside me woke up. It wasn't blind rage. It wasn't despair. It was something much more dangerous. It was clarity. A clarity that cut like a sharp blade. From that moment on, I knew exactly what I needed to do. They thought they had won. That they had reduced me to nothing. But they were wrong. Very wrong. I smiled. Not a smile of someone who accepts defeat, but a smile of someone who has already decided on their next move. Nobody expected that. Not her, not him, not the curious people around. Because while everyone thought I would collapse there, in the middle of that party, I already had something else in mind. Something epic. Something shocking. Something no one would ever forget. The decision had already been made. And when I finally spoke, my voice echoed in the room, silencing every whisper, every suppressed laugh, every look of pity. I was no longer the betrayed and humiliated man. I was the man who would turn the tide. And in that moment, before I left, I realized something even bigger, that betrayal wasn't just about my marriage. She went much further than that. I hadn't just lost a wife that night. I had lost something that, until that moment, I thought was unbreakable. But what no one expected was what came next. Because that night, in front of everyone, I made a decision that would change everything. Something that would not only destroy the lover and the cheating wife, but would show every person in that room that underestimating the wrong man is too high a price to pay. And now, the game was mine. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and never romanticize betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but the pain, consequences and destruction that betrayal causes are very real. Our goal is to show how a wrong choice can ruin lives, families and everything that seemed solid. Get ready, because today's story is intense, shocking and full of twists and turns. Take a deep breath, and let's get started. The night was perfect, and the hotel's grand ballroom sparkled under the crystal chandeliers. The atmosphere was elegant, full of lively conversations, clinking glasses and a light aroma of champagne mixed with the expensive perfume of the women walking through the corridors. It was a grand celebration, an annual company event, where executives, employees and investors gathered to toast another year of achievements. Among the guests, one couple stood out, not only because of their striking presence, but because of the way they seemed to fit in perfectly with each other. Daniel and Sarah. He was a man with an imposing posture, a confident look, someone who exuded respect wherever he went. She is a sophisticated woman, with classic beauty, a discreet smile, always with a touch of mystery in her eyes. Anyone observing them from the outside could say that they were the example of the ideal couple, those who built a solid history together, a marriage based on respect and love. And in some ways, for a long time, that's exactly how things were. Daniel was a man of principle, someone who valued family above all else. He had always been ambitious, but never to the point of sacrificing his personal life for work. For him, professional success and personal happiness needed to go hand in hand, and he was proud of the balance he had managed to build. Ever since he met Sarah, he knew he wanted to spend his life with her. It was a love that grew over time, matured through challenges and victories, and became an unshakable partnership. At least, that's what he believed. Sarah, in turn, has always had a magnetic presence. She was the type of woman who attracted attention without needing much effort. Intelligent, charming, with a captivating way of expressing herself, she knew how to move naturally in any environment. At the beginning of their relationship, she seemed to have found in Daniel everything she had always been looking for. Security, affection, genuine love. He was her safe haven, the man who made her feel loved and protected. But the years passed, and the feeling of stability that once comforted her began to imperceptibly suffocate her. Their life was seemingly perfect. A spacious house in an upscale neighborhood, family dinners, trips to paradisiacal places, friends who admired them as a model couple. But within that impeccable routine, there was something that not even those closest to us could see. Sarah began to feel an emptiness she couldn't explain, an unsettling feeling that something was missing. She had everything, but still, sometimes, she felt lost, as if her life was following a script written by someone else. Daniel, on the other hand, never suspected anything. He was a dedicated husband, attentive to details, always trying to surprise her with small gestures, from flowers left in the car to affectionate notes hidden in the most unlikely places. For him, everything was fine. If Sarah was thoughtful at times, it was just tiredness, natural reflections of life. He didn't understand the small changes, the distant looks, the smiles that didn't reach his eyes. That night at the company event, everything seemed as usual. Sarah looked stunning in an elegant dress, Daniel by her side, proud to have her there. They chatted with colleagues, laughed about office stories, toasted the future. But there was something different in the air. Sarah seemed a little more distracted than usual, and Daniel noticed, even though he didn't think much of it. In his head, everything was just another social event, a night of celebration like any other. What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, his life was about to change forever. Sarah looked around, her eyes sweeping the room as if searching for something, or someone. The soft music in the background created an engaging atmosphere, laughter and conversations mixed into a constant murmur. She was there, but at the same time, she wasn't. His mind seemed to wander to some other place, to some other idea he dared not name. Daniel, distracted in a business conversation, didn't notice the restlessness in her eyes. She took a deep breath, as if trying to ground herself in the present, but there was a subtle tension in her expression, something no one there seemed to notice. Or almost no one. Time passed, and the party became more lively. Alcohol made smiles easier, words looser. Daniel noticed that Sarah had walked away for a few moments, but he wasn't worried. She always liked to walk around, talk, enjoy each event in her own way. He trusted her. Always trusted. When she returned, she looked the same as ever, but there was something about her posture that escaped him. Something he couldn't immediately identify. The night wore on, and Daniel felt a tightness in his chest, a strange sensation that he couldn't explain. He looked at Sarah, who was smiling at someone across the room, a smile he hadn't seen in a while. A different smile, filled with something I couldn't decipher. It was just a fleeting moment, but it was enough to plant a doubt in his mind. He tried to ignore, push away any negative thoughts. He was tired, maybe it was just his imagination playing tricks. After all, he never had any reason to distrust her. Never. But something that night was off. He just didn't know what. Yet. The night continued its course like so many others, with toasts, smiles and conversations that floated around the room. Daniel, between sips of whiskey, allowed himself to relax. I was proud to be there, to be recognized for my hard work, to build a solid career. He looked at Sarah with that same look of admiration from years ago, as if he could still see in her the woman he fell in love with. But there was something about his posture that didn't fit, something almost imperceptible to anyone else but not him. Maybe it was the way she held the champagne glass, or the way she looked away when he stared at her for too long. Small details that, isolated, meant nothing, but together created an unsettling sensation. He tried to ignore it, to believe it was all in his head, but the doubt was already there, growing, expanding silently within him. The lights in the room flickered with golden reflections, the atmosphere vibrated with the energy of the party. Sarah glided through the space as if she belonged to that world of elegance and easy laughs. She always had this ability, this subtle magnetism that attracted people without needing much effort. Daniel knew this, and for years this was one of the characteristics that fascinated him most about her. But now, there was something different. Her presence was charged with something he couldn't name, a tension that was almost invisible but real. He followed her movements from a distance, noting how her expressions seemed carefully calculated, as if she were hiding something. She smiled, talked, but her eyes strayed from something, or someone. He wanted to believe he was exaggerating, but a part of him, that instinctual part that never failed, said something was out of place. Sarah looked restless, like she was waiting for something. His gaze was lost in the crowd, and his breathing seemed more rapid than normal. Daniel noticed that her phone was constantly vibrating in her bag, but she didn't reach for it. He just glanced quickly, as if he already knew exactly what was written there. And then, something happened. It was quick, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but for him it was a punch in the gut. A man approached, tall, confident, with a smile full of something that Daniel recognized immediately. It wasn't just any smile. It was the kind of smile of someone who knows something that no one else there knew. A smile that carried complicity. And Sarah reciprocated. It was discreet, but it was there. The look, the silent exchange, the slight lift of the corner of the lips. It was an instant, a fragment of a second, but enough for Daniel to feel a pang of discomfort in his chest. He tried to push the thought away, tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a coworker, someone she'd had a conversation with before. But then he noticed something even more disturbing. The man didn't just look at Sarah. He looked for him, with an air of contained defiance, as if he was testing your reaction, as if he was waiting to see how long would it take before he understood what was happening. Daniel's blood ran cold for a moment, but he maintained his composure. He was not a man of impulsive reactions, he never was. If there was something there to be understood, he would understand it in his own time. But what he didn't expect was the intensity of what he was about to discover. Sarah pulled away at an opportune moment, smiling at Daniel as if asking for permission for a moment. He just nodded, following every step she took with his eyes. His heart was beating fast, as if he already knew what he would find if he decided to follow her. For a moment, he thought about letting it go, going back to the conversation with his colleagues and pretending that none of it bothered him. But he couldn't. The restlessness was too great, the doubt grew like a poison spreading throughout the body. He finished his drink in one go and started walking, keeping his distance, watching. Sarah passed through the hall's double doors and entered a side hallway. The man followed immediately, without hesitation, as if they had already done this before. Every step Daniel took felt heavier, as if the ground itself wanted to hold him there. The hallway was dimly lit, the sounds of the party becoming more and more distant. He didn't know what he expected to find, but a part of him already felt like he wouldn't like what he was about to see. As he turned the corner, his heart stopped for a second. There they were, just a few feet away, engaged in a conversation that shouldn't be happening. Very close, very intimate. The man was touching Sarah's arm with a familiarity that made a knot form in Daniel's stomach. But it was what happened next that destroyed any hope he still carried. Sarah laughed. Not just any laugh, not a social or polite laugh. She laughed like someone who is comfortable, like someone who is where she wants to be. And then, the man held her face with both hands and kissed her. Time stopped. Daniel felt the world spin around him, a wave of heat and cold at the same time. He wanted to look away, he wanted to believe that this was a mistake, a momentary delusion. But it wasn't. There was no hesitation in Sarah, there was no guilt. She simply gave herself into the kiss as if nothing else existed. As if he, her husband, had never been part of her life. The betrayal, which until then was just a suspicion, was now a brutal reality before his eyes. And the worst of all, they weren't worried at all if anyone saw them. As if this hasn't been a problem for a long time. The party continued in the hall, distant and irrelevant. But there, in that dimly lit corridor, Daniel was no longer the same man he had been a few minutes ago. The pain of discovery was sharp, but something even more intense began to take hold of him. Betrayal was not just an act of fleeting desire. It was something much bigger. Something he didn't know yet, but would soon discover. And when he found out, nothing would be the same. The silence was absolute. The narrow, dimly lit hallway seemed to close in around Daniel as he processed what he had just seen. The bitter taste of betrayal spread through his mouth, suffocating, overwhelming. Every detail of that scene seemed recorded in his mind with cruel precision, the way Sarah gave herself to the kiss, the way that man's hands roamed her face with intimacy, the slight shiver that ran through her body when he pulled her closer. There was no doubt, there was no possible justification. It was real. She was there with him, at that moment, without hesitation, without guilt, without even imagining that her husband was watching her. The initial shock dissipated, giving way to something much more intense. Daniel didn't know if it was hate, if it was fury or if it was the pain transforming him into someone else, someone he had never met before. But one thing was certain, he would not remain silent. Before he could even think straight, his feet were moving. He felt the blood pulsing in his temples, his breathing quickened, his chest heavy. The next thing he knew, he was already in front of them, and the impact of his presence was immediate. Sarah took a step back, her eyes wide, her face losing color. The man beside her, however, held her gaze, but there was something different now. A trace of nervousness, a fissure in the exaggerated confidence he demonstrated before. Daniel didn't look away. The air seemed charged with electricity, as if a storm was about to break out there, in that hallway. Sarah's voice came first, hesitant, fragile, as if she was trying to muster the strength to say something that made sense. But there were no words capable of reconstructing what was crumbling before them. Daniel, I can explain. He laughed, but it was a dry, empty laugh, without any humor. His voice was deep, firm, but filled with a contained fury that made the other man take a step back. Explain. Explain what, exactly? The fact that you're here, making out with another guy while I was there, in the middle of the party, thinking I had a faithful wife? Or do you want to explain to me how long this has been going on? Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Daniel felt a pang in his chest when he realized that she didn't deny it. There was no denial. Her silence was the biggest blow he could take. Because that was it. It was real. The man next to her, until then silent, decided to intervene. His voice was low, but carried with a condescending tone that made Daniel's anger boil inside him. "Look, man. I know this sounds bad, but maybe we should talk calmly. There's no need to make a scene." Daniel turned to him, and at that moment, everything became clear. The tone of voice, the posture, the way he held Sarah, as if he was sure she belonged to him. He wasn't just any lover. It wasn't a passing mistake, a one-night stand. He was too comfortable in that position. And then came the final blow. The man gave a half smile, a provocative smile, which shouldn't be there. He didn't seem worried. He seemed satisfied. And then, the truth came like a punch in the gut. "She's mine now." The sentence was said naturally, without hesitation, without regret. As if he was just restating a fait accompli. As if Daniel were the intruder, the inconvenience, what no longer belonged to that equation. Daniel's mind went blank for a moment. He was humiliated in front of everyone. He felt the weight of the gaze of the curious people passing by, the discreet whispers, the tension in the air. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was disdain. It was the certainty with which that man spoke. It was the fact that Sarah didn't correct him. She didn't say anything. He didn't shout that it was a mistake, he didn't push the other man's hands away, he didn't try to deny the ownership implicit in his words. She just stood there, motionless, as if it didn't bother her. As if accepting the exchange. And then, something inside Daniel broke. Definitely. He closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath. And when he opened them again, there was something different about them. A dangerous glow. A dead silence that made even Sarah shudder. He took a step forward. The lover maintained his pose, but there was a tension in his jaw, and discomfort that hadn't been there before. "You think you won, don't you?" His voice was low, controlled. But charged with something much more intense than anger. The other man frowned, as if he didn't understand. "What do you mean by that?" Daniel tilted his head slightly, watching him like a predator watches its prey. Then, slowly, he pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and showed the screen. And there was the truth. He was the real owner of the company. The ballroom, the event, the toast, the achievements that were being celebrated that night, they were his. He was the majority shareholder, the man who signed the contracts, who paid the salaries. And that guy, that arrogant and presumptuous lover, was nothing more than an employee. Daniel stepped forward, and for the first time, the lover seemed insecure. "I can destroy you. Here and now." The silence was piercing. Everyone was watching. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. The lover's smile disappeared, replaced by a look of uncertainty. He opened his mouth to say something, but Daniel raised his hand, cutting off any attempt. "Do you think you can take something from me? That you can expose me, humiliate me, take my wife and leave here as if nothing happened? I own this place. I own your job, your salary, your stability. And believe me, you just lost everything." The color drained from the lover's face. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, unable to hide her shock. I didn't know that. I didn't know Daniel had so much power. And now, it was too late. Daniel turned and started walking. But before leaving, he took one last look at the two of them. A look that said it all. "You two deserve each other." And then, he walked away. But not before making your final decision. He would not leave there a defeated man. And by the end of that night, everyone would know it. The hall seemed distant now, as if everything around it had become a blurry, irrelevant scene. Daniel walked down the hallway, but he couldn't feel his own steps. There was something inside him, a mixture of emptiness and a cold fire that burned inside, but in a controlled way. He wasn't broken, he wasn't desperate. No more. He was a man who had just lost everything, and at the same time, a man who had just realized how much he could take back. The party was still behind him, but people knew. They always knew. Whispers arose in the corners, curious and embarrassed looks were thrown over their shoulders. Daniel didn't care. They could talk, they could speculate, they could try to fit this scandal into some convenient narrative. But no one there knew what was about to happen. He left the hotel without looking back. The cold night air hit his face, but the adrenaline was still coursing through his veins, making everything more vivid. He picked up the phone, dialed a number and waited. The lawyer's voice came from the other end, drowsy and surprised. "Daniel? Do you know what time it is?" "Time for a surgical cut," he replied, his voice firm, with no room for doubt. "I want his name off the company before sunrise." The lawyer hesitated. "Wait, what are you talking about? He doesn't work for me anymore. Give whatever reason you need. Broke terms, misconduct, incompetence, whatever. Get him off the staff now. And one more thing. I want Sarah out of the house tomorrow. Divorce papers as soon as possible." "Daniel, is this serious? What happened?" He hung up. There was nothing to be explained. Sarah entered the house almost at dawn. Her heels made an uncomfortable echo on the wooden floor, and she paused for a moment at the entrance, as if she needed the courage to continue. Something inside her told her Daniel would be there. That he would be waiting. But when she entered the room, she found only silence. That silence carried a weight that you couldn't see, but you could feel. She climbed the stairs slowly, feeling her heart racing with each step. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe he was sleeping, maybe he was pretending nothing had happened, maybe he was about to yell at her. But when he opened the bedroom door, the impact was much worse than any explosive reaction. The drawers were open, clothes removed, a few boxes stacked next to the bed. Half the closet was empty. She put her hand over her mouth, as if the shock had come with a cruel delay. He had already started to leave her life. And fast. She felt her eyes burn, but there were no tears. Not yet. He walked to the bed and sat down, closing his eyes for a moment. She knew that Daniel was not a man who would let himself be passed over. But even so, the speed at which everything was falling apart was frightening. That's when she heard footsteps behind her. She slowly turned around, and there he was, leaning against the doorframe. His look was different now. There were no screams, no heated accusations. It was worse than that. He looked at her as if she no longer existed. "You're back," he said, his voice low, controlled. She tried to take a deep breath, to gather something that could be said. But before he could find words, he continued. "It must be strange to return to a house that is no longer yours." Sarah blinked, confused. "What do you mean by that?" He crossed his arms, tilting his head slightly. "I want to say that your days here are over. Your bags are in the lobby. My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow. The divorce is already being arranged." She felt a chill run down her spine. "Have you already made this decision without even talking to me?" His laugh came without any humor. "Talk. You want me to sit down and have a civil conversation with you after what happened? I saw you, Sarah. I saw everything. You didn't even have the decency to care if I was there or not. So no, there's no talking. What there is a period." She opened her mouth to respond, but fell silent. Because there were no excuses. He was right. "It was a mistake," he whispered, finally. "A mistake I made." Daniel leaned forward slightly, looking directly into her eyes. "A mistake? You call that a mistake?" "No. A mistake is forgetting a meeting. A mistake is buying a birthday present on the wrong day. That was a choice, Sarah. A conscious, repeated, intentional choice. You didn't trip over him and fall into his arms by accident." She felt breathless. Every word that came out of his mouth was a blade cutting through his chest. I loved you, he continued, and for the first time his voice cracked a little. I loved you more than anything. And what did you do? You reduced me to nothing. You made me a man that everyone looked at with pity at that party. I'm not that man, Sarah. I never was. And you turned me into this. She closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that now insisted on falling. Please, Daniel, he shook his head. No. There's no more, please. There's no more us. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. A heavy silence fell between the two. Then, he took a step back. You have until the end of the day to leave. And then, he turned and left the room. Hours later, Sarah sat in the car, looking at the house for the last time. Everything he knew, everything he built, now no longer belonged to him. She wanted to regret it, she wanted to be able to say that she would do everything differently if she had the chance. But would it be true? Did she, deep down, already know this would happen? The phone vibrated in his hands. She looked at the screen and saw her lover's name. He took a deep breath before answering. What happened? He asked immediately. Are you well? She looked ahead, feeling an immense emptiness spread inside her. No, he replied. I don't think I am. There was silence on the other end of the line. And then, finally, she realized. She had lost everything. And there was no turning back. Light rain fell on the asphalt as Sarah remained inside the car, looking at the house where she had lived for years. The fogged glass reflected her own image, but she no longer recognized herself. There was a lingering pain inside her, an anguish that grew by the second. His chest rose and fell at a rapid pace, and reality began to fully settle in his mind. There was no going back. There were no patches. What was done could never be erased. The soft touch of water on the windows seemed to mock his silence. There were no tears running down his face, but inside, everything was falling apart. What tormented her most was not just the loss of Daniel, but the realization that she was nothing to him anymore. He started the car and left the front of the house. I didn't know where to go, I didn't know what to do. The lover had already tried to get in touch a few times, but now, he seemed more distant. That voice that once made her feel desire now sounded unimportant. As if something had been broken between the two of them too. The warmth he felt when they were together no longer seemed so strong. It didn't seem like enough. Was it ever really? The thought made her grip the steering wheel tightly. What did I do? The question echoed inside his head, and the more he thought, the more he realized the bitter answer: she chose to lose. As she drove aimlessly, her mind reviewed every detail, every moment that led her to that point. She thought she could find something new, something exciting, something that would take her away from the monotony of the life she had with Daniel. She thought that maybe she was looking for freedom, new emotions, a piece of herself that seemed lost over the years. But now he saw clearly, it wasn't freedom he found. It was destruction. Nothing was yours anymore. The man who loved her most no longer existed for her. The marriage that once protected her was now just a trail of ashes. And the lover who promised to be something more now seemed as distant as a stranger. There was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Daniel, on the other hand, didn't look back. His focus now was on moving forward, on rebuilding. I would no longer regret someone who didn't choose him. Every move you made, every decision you made, was a step away from that chapter. He wouldn't let Sarah's betrayal define him, nor would he allow his pain to be his only legacy. But there was something inside him that still throbbed, something that still burned. What to do with all this emptiness? The days passed slowly. Sarah temporarily moved to a small, simple apartment, without the grandeur of the home she previously had. Every corner of the new space felt cold, indifferent. It was lonely, it was small, it was a reflection of what his life had become. Her lover tried to find her a few times, but she no longer saw him with the same eyes. His every word sounded artificial, every touch seemed meaningless. He was never a sweetheart. It was never a future. Just an illusion. And now, it wasn't even that anymore. She realized, too late, that what once excited her now it just disgusted her. Daniel continued with his routine. At work, he was respected as always. But the looks he received were different now. Everyone knew. Everyone commented. He could feel the whispers as he passed through the hallways. But he didn't care. No more. The weight of betrayal was still there, but now it served as fuel. He became stronger. More focused. There was no room for regrets. Just for new beginnings. Sarah tried to talk to him a few times. He tried to ask for forgiveness. But Daniel never answered his calls. Never responded to your messages. There was nothing more to be said. There was nothing left to salvage. She was dead to him. And that was the worst pain I could feel. Because when love turns into indifference, it becomes an unbearable weight. There was no more screaming, fighting, crying. Just absolute silence. And that silence was worse than any argument. And then came the hardest part. The divorce was made official. There were no major clashes, nor long disputes. Everything was signed coldly, like any other commercial contract. Sarah felt her name being removed from the documents, she felt her connection with Daniel being bureaucratically erased. But that was when she saw his final signature who really noticed, he was free. And she was no longer part of his story. The last time they saw each other was in court, when everything was finalized. Sarah tried to say something, anything, but Daniel didn't give her space. He just got up and left, as if nothing else mattered. She stood there, still, feeling an internal cold that she had never experienced before. It was too late. But destiny sometimes has cruel ways of showing its ironies. Because when Sarah saw Daniel a few weeks later, she didn't see him alone. He was accompanied. There was another woman at his side. And his expression was different. He smiled. Not a forced smile, not a polite smile. But a genuine smile, a smile of someone who had moved on. And in that moment, Sarah felt her heart shatter in a way she had never felt before. She lost. He lost to his own choice. And now, there was nothing more he could do. Sarah never imagined that silence could be so unbearable. Since Daniel signed the papers and left the courtroom without looking back, the days have dragged on like an inevitable punishment. His new home, a small, lifeless apartment, seemed an exact reflection of what was left of his existence. Before, his time was filled with elaborate dinners, social gatherings, and travel. Now, it was filled with empty hours, trapped between four walls that echoed only their own thoughts. She could barely sleep. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, trying to understand when exactly did I lose everything. Where, between the warm nights next to Daniel and the smiles of complicity, did her life take the path that led her to that abyss? He tried to distract himself, he tried to pretend he was fine. She went out a few times, met old friends, forced laughter into conversations that didn't interest her. But nothing filled the hole that grew inside her. Not even her lover, who before seemed to be the answer to her concerns, now made sense. He insisted on seeing her for a while, tried to pull her back into that fantasy where everything seemed forbidden and exciting. But when she looked at him now, she saw only one mistake. There was no passion, there was no emotion. There was only the memory of a wrong choice. And then it just stopped responding. There was no reason to stay in touch anymore. He was never the love of your life. It was never a future. Just an escape. And escapes always end with someone lost. One day, Sarah was in a cafe, holding a hot cup in her hands as she looked outside, observing the movement of the streets. The cold of the cloudy morning seemed to cling to her skin, but what really froze her was the exact moment she saw Daniel walk across the sidewalk on the other side of the street. His heart jumped in his chest, but it wasn't out of nostalgia. It was the shock. He was not alone. There was a woman next to him. She was beautiful. He had a lively look, a discreet smile, a posture that exuded confidence. But what bothered Sarah most wasn't the woman's appearance. It was the way Daniel looked at her. There was a sparkle in his eyes, a naturalness that she knew very well. It was the way he looked at someone he loved. And it wasn't her anymore. Sarah felt the coffee cool between her fingers. For an instant, his entire body went rigid, as if every cell of his was being crushed from within. I didn't want to face that moment, but I couldn't look away. They were talking, walking slowly, as if time didn't matter. As if they were happy. And then Daniel said something, and the woman laughed. Really laughed. A spontaneous, sincere laugh. And he smiled together. He hadn't smiled like that in a long time. Not even when they were still married. Sarah felt her breathing hitch. Her fingers gripped the porcelain of the cup tightly, but there was nothing that could hold her at that moment. Because in that instant, she understood. Daniel didn't just move on. He was better off without her. The impact was devastating. She was a reminder of the past, while he was building something new. The betrayal that once seemed like a mistake she could try to redeem herself from was now a point of no return. There was no turning back. Why he didn't want to go back. And that thought hit her with a pain she never imagined she would feel. On impulse, he got up from the table and left the cafe. The cold hit her face, but it didn't wake her from the drowsiness that took over her. His steps were uncertain, aimless. Everything seemed strange, distant, as if it no longer belonged to life itself. At some point, he picked up his cell phone and, without thinking, dialed Daniel's number. The phone rang. 1, 2, 3 times. Until it goes to voicemail. His voice appeared automatically in the recording. The same voice that, for years, was your anchor. But now, it was just a distant sound, no emotion, no heat. Leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Sarah hesitated. His finger hovered over the off button. But before he could stop himself, the words came out. Low, trembling, filled with silent despair. Daniel. I just wanted to talk to you. I know you probably don't want to hear me, but I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. I feel everything. I know it's too late, but I needed to say it. I just needed to hear you one last time. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. The click of shutdown sounded like a final point. And she knew. I would never return it again. Time passed, but nothing got easier. Sarah tried to move on with her life, tried to find some meaning in it all, but every time she thought she was starting to accept it, one detail would knock her down again. A familiar scent in the middle of the street, a song that was playing on the radio, a dish he used to like. Little fragments that reminded her that, at some point, she had it all. And threw away. Daniel, on the other hand, pursued his life with determination. He still carried scars, because no one comes out unscathed from betrayal. But now, he knew there was something beyond the pain. There were new beginnings. There were possibilities. And he wasn't about to let it go to waste. His new relationship wasn't something he planned, it wasn't something he desperately sought. But it happened. And it was natural. Because love, when true, does not need to be forced. Sarah understood this too late. One night, sitting alone on the couch in her small apartment, looking at the boxes she hadn't yet unpacked, she picked up an old photo of them. A portrait of a time that seemed like another life. He ran his fingers over the image, feeling a tightness in his chest. And for the first time, allowed himself to really cry. Not because of what he lost. but for what it destroyed. Daniel was no longer there. And never would be again. And that was his biggest punishment. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Life continued its course, indifferent to what had happened. For Daniel, the past was no longer a shadow that haunted him, but a distant memory that no longer had power over him. His world expanded, new opportunities emerged, and he embraced each one with renewed determination. The man who previously dedicated his life to a failed marriage was now dedicating himself to something much more important: yourself. He found new projects, new challenges, and, above all, he found someone who didn't just see him as a secure base to lean on, but rather a true partner. The love that came into his life came unexpectedly, but not accidentally. It was light, it was natural, it was different from anything I had experienced before. For the first time in a long time, he was happy again. The reconstruction process was not easy. He needed to relearn how to trust, he needed to free himself from the deep marks that betrayal left. But he did it. And what was once pain was now just a distant echo, unable to affect him. The man who had been betrayed and humiliated at that party no longer existed. In his place, there was someone stronger, wiser, and completely in charge of himself. Sarah. Sarah was just a name. A memory that no longer hurt, no longer mattered. She was the past. And he didn't live there anymore. Sarah, on the other hand, was never able to move on. Everything around her seemed like a faded illusion of a life she herself destroyed. At first, she tried to convince herself that she could start over, that she would find something that would make her feel alive again. But nothing was ever enough. The small apartment where I lived was suffocating. The nights were lonely. The phone no longer rang like it used to. The messages he sent to Daniel were ignored or even delivered. She had been erased from his life. And that was a cruel truth she would have to live with. She tried to convince herself that he wasn't that important, that one day she would feel something similar to the way she felt about him again. But over time, she realized that she was lying to herself. Daniel was not replaceable. He was the only real thing she had. And now it belonged to someone else. And that hurt more than any punishment he could receive. The lover, the one she once believed to be an escape valve, turned out to be exactly what he always was, an opportunist. The moment their relationship stopped being a forbidden adventure and became a nuisance, he disappeared. The man who said he loved her, who promised a life full of emotion, simply moved forward without looking back. She wasn't the love of his life. It was just a hobby. And now, I was alone. The days passed slowly, each one emptier than the last. Sarah started to avoid going out, she started to hide from the world. The parties I used to go to, the friends I thought I would have forever, everything had disappeared. People commented, doors closed. Betrayal did not free her. Betrayal imprisoned her. One day, without knowing exactly why, she took the car and drove aimlessly. The streets were the same, but they looked so different. Every corner held a memory, a fragment of a life she destroyed. When she realized it, she was standing in front of the old restaurant where they used to have dinner together. The place where, years ago, Daniel held her hand and promised he would always be by her side. She broke that promise. And now, there was no one there to fix it. The car window reflected his own face, but she no longer recognized herself. The woman who used to be strong, seductive, confident, was now just a shadow. She had thrown away the best she had, and the worst punishment was knowing I could never get it back. Meanwhile, Daniel was walking through a new phase of life. The past no longer had space in his mind. He was heading to a new dinner, with someone who really wanted to be by his side. Someone who didn't need to betray him to discover that she loved him. The restaurant was new, life was new. Everything was different. And he wouldn't trade it for anything. Sarah didn't know that. But maybe it would be better this way. The worst punishment for someone who cheats is not being hated. It's being forgotten. Now, the story was over. Everyone went their own way. Daniel found a new love. Sarah found repentance. And in the end, the only thing left for her was emptiness. If you made it this far, comment what you thought of this story. Your opinion is very important. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Remember, betrayal never leads to a happy ending.